This is Jody Lemieux, your host to the Spiritually Aligned CEO podcast, and you're listening to Conversations with Jody, your one divine guidance system, giving your business and mindset a spiritual facelift by tapping into energy, gaining inspiration, and up-leveling your life by unleashing your infinite potential. And on today's episode, I have author and speaker Angela Legh joining me today. Angela, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. I'm just thrilled to speak with you today.
And what I'm really excited about talking with you about specifically is this conscious parenting and your books, the Bella Santini books. I'm really excited for the audience to hear more about your collection of books.
Okay, so it's interesting because the conscious parenting came out of my books. When I first started writing the Bella Santini Chronicles, which is a children's series of fairy tales that teach emotional intelligence, I had written a promise, a parent's promise to the child and a child's promise to the parent, and they're like ancillary pages in the books. And the parent's promise is along the lines of, I will honor your emotions, I will honor your feelings, and I will love you unconditionally. And out of that grew the idea that, most parents will parent based on how their parents parented. Or if they had a parent who was extremely difficult, they might choose to parent the opposite way. And so there's like the default parenting. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I have a head cold today. The default parenting or the opposite. So a very strict parent may inspire a child to grow up to be a very non-boundary setting parent. And while it does have, when you look at parenting itself, there are different outcomes depending on what kind of parent you're choosing to be. And when you have a very strict parent, the outcome is a child who questions their ability, a child who has no self-esteem. When you have a parent who is overgiving and too lenient, then the child doesn't understand the importance of boundaries and doesn't know how to put boundaries in their life. And that is a big problem because boundaries are part of self-love.
Oh, I love what you said there. Boundaries are part of self-love, part of love. I loved
Yeah.
how you expressed that. Can you share with us a little bit about how this series of books on teaching children about feelings came about?
Well, um, I had this like soul mission to write books, and I had no idea what I was going to write about. And I remember I was in a marriage that was emotionally difficult, and I remember being in a psychologist's office. I said, I just feel like I'm supposed to write a book. And my former husband looked at me and he said, who are you to write a book? And that was the kind of energy that I lived in that marriage. I finally chose self-love and chose myself after a wildfire destroyed our house. And in the aftermath of that, I was thrown into a dark night of the soul where I questioned everything. It's like, if you can lose everything in 10 minutes, then maybe you can change how you're doing life a little bit. And so I ended up quitting my job and leaving that marriage. And I really understand that my inability to set boundaries and hold boundaries in that marriage was part of the problem.
Wow. What an amazing awareness for yourself. And for those listening, what piece of advice would you give someone who might be experiencing something similar to what you were experiencing? You know,
Yeah. If they're experiencing emotional abuse in a marriage, the the biggest advice I can give is that you can't change someone else. You can only change you. And when you choose yourself first, you're acting in self love. You are teaching your children to love themselves because you're modeling self love behavior. And so sometimes you have to leave a marriage in order to truly live in self love. And for me, that was the case.
choosing you. What a beautiful message. It's really important for not only for women, but also for, like you said, for the children to understand that choosing love, choosing themselves is really empowering.
It's very, very empowering. And I love that you brought that into this conversation. It's, can you think of a time in your childhood where you did not act in self love and the repercussions of that? I certainly can.
I certainly can as well, right?
Yeah. And so I'm sure many of the listeners can also relate to that. And we weren't taught to love ourselves. We weren't taught to put ourselves first. In fact, young women were raised to be nice, to be quiet, to be, an adornment. And we weren't raised to speak our truth. We weren't raised to choose our needs before someone else's. When we actually do choose ourselves before someone else, we are choosing self love. So many of us are taught to give, to give, to give, to serve others, to put others before yourself. And that teaching is actually disempowering for the giver. So it's like once you choose yourself, you have empowered yourself. And when I was in the marriage, I thought, I can't hurt him. And if I leave, that's hurting him. But as I look at the energies around it now, I understand that by staying, I hurt him. I judged his behaviors and that hurt him. And I expected something out of him that was different than what I got, and that hurt him. And so my inability to accept him as he was actually hurt him. And so when I left, I was relieving him of those pains by taking them away.
Wow. Oh my goodness, what strength, inner strength you have for that. Wow. And so from this lesson about yourself in your marriage, and
Mm-hmm.
so now you're taking these lessons and imparting them to children in these beautiful fairy tale books. I can see how this progression of your learning, and now you can pass this on to children. And so tell me
Yeah.
more about how that came about, the writing of the books.
I didn't realize that I was writing life lessons into the story. The story would just flow. It's kind of, I think of it as channeled because I don't plot this thing out. It just flows out of me. So it was at the end of book 1 when I'm getting ready for publishing that I was looking at some of the, as you write a book, you go over and you reread parts of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I knew this when I was 10 years old, I could have made such different choices in my life. And that's when I knew that I had done something that, I wish that I had when I was 10.
And so if you could just share one of the lessons from your books, I know there's a few collections, but
Yeah.
maybe something that really stands out to you that's really memorable that someone listening today can take with them.
So, one of the lessons in the book is about feeling feelings. And I learned about emotional repression as a child. My father was an alcoholic, which is a type of emotional repression. You're numbing the feelings through alcohol. Um, I judged my father's rage as a youngster and decided I couldn't be like him. I couldn't be that way. So that made me decide that rage and anger were bad and I could not express them. So I repressed rage and anger for most of my adult life. And it wasn't until I was doing the self healing and writing these books all at the same time, um, understanding that emotions are energy. Energy must flow. So when we try and repress or stop an emotion, some people just shove an emotion down as a coping mechanism. I don't want to feel that right now. Well, the freedom actually comes when you feel it. So the tool in the book is called focused attention, where you're putting all your focus on the emotion. And in so doing, you're acknowledging that you're having that feeling, and then you're giving yourself permission to feel it. When you give focused attention to your feeling, your mind can't be stuck in the whirligig of all the circumstances that caused that feeling. So by doing that real deep focus of attention, what you're doing is allowing the emotion to flow. You're stopping your mind from the cycle pattern of repetitive, how would I say it? Emotions start with a thought. And it is the thought that we must manage, not the emotion. And so getting your mind off the cycle of repetitive thought is a very big help in that emotional flow.
Oh, what a great lesson. It's managing the thoughts and allowing the feelings to come up so you can observe them and allow them to come through. Like you said, they're just energy and they need to flow. They need a place to be expressed.
Absolutely. They are information.
Yeah.
And, if you're repressing how you feel about something, you're in denial of your truth, basically.
Wow. Denial of truth. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. That is a really interesting thought.
Because when you think about it, we can't tell someone that their feelings are invalid. They have the right to feel what they're feeling. And we can tell someone that their thoughts are causing a cycle pattern of feeling and that we can help them shift their thoughts. But the feeling itself it's valid. It's how they feel about it.
Yeah. And so once you release that emotion, you're now moving to truth, as you have expressed. You're expressing truth. You're expressing
Yeah.
truth.
And people talk about good and bad emotions. And even I talked about, seeing anger as bad. Uh, energy is, neutral. It is. And so there is no good or bad emotion. However, the expression of an emotion can be characterized as good or bad. So when you do a negative expression of anger, then you're lashing out at someone, you're raising your voice, you're pushing your anger onto someone else. A positive expression of anger would be to paint, like the painting behind me, where there's, you're just putting your anger into the paint. Or you can write a letter to someone telling them how mad they how their behavior brought you to this place of madness, because no one makes us mad. We react. And that once we can own that and say we react, then that sets us up, because when we own it, we can change it.
Yeah, ownership of feelings. Absolutely. And if you could just share with the audience, how can they reach out to you, purchase your books? What's the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
So my website, angelalegh.com, it's ANGELALEGH.com, has access to the books, as well as you can email me, you can comment on my blog posts. There's ways to get in touch with me through my website.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. What is one thing that you want to leave the listeners with to take with them as they move throughout their day?
The one thing I really want people to embrace is to give themselves grace, because we were taught by our parents, who were taught by their parents, who were taught by their parents, and just go back how many generations of people who were really unaware of the impact of emotional repression. So if you find yourself reaching for that drink because you're stressed, or eating something because you're stressed, give yourself grace. You didn't learn this. You didn't learn the positive expression of emotions. And you can step into that over time, but there's going to be times when you step back into the pattern of behavior that has been so ingrained in you. So give yourself grace, because it's not your fault.